There's a strange movement that happens to almost everyone who embarks on the spiritual path. At first, it feels magical, like we've discovered a hidden world that was always there but just out of reach. We start feeling more aligned, more aware. We meditate, journal, cleanse, repeat. We start talking about energy, vibration, synchronicities. And for a while it all feels right. But then something shifts quietly, almost imperceptibly. The very journey that once felt like liberation starts to feel like a loop. The path that was supposed to set us free begins to trap us, and we don't even realize it. That's the danger. Because when your spiritual path starts going the wrong direction, it doesn't look like failure. It looks like progress. The first sign that your spiritual path is going the wrong direction is this: you start using spirituality to escape reality instead of facing it. This is more common than we'd like to admit. Meditation becomes avoidance. Affirmations become denial. We say, "I'm protecting my peace," when really we're avoiding difficult conversations. We say, "It's not my energy," when really we're just unwilling to take responsibility. We say, "I'm trusting the universe," but let's be honest, sometimes that's just code for "I'm afraid to act." The spiritual path isn't meant to be a bubble. It's meant to be a blade. It cuts through illusion. It reveals what's been hidden. If your journey is making you less connected to the world, less honest about your emotions, less willing to wrestle with discomfort, then it's not evolution. It's escape. And escape, no matter how beautiful the language, is still running. The second sign is subtle but powerful. You begin to measure your worth by how spiritual you appear. You start to curate your identity around your journey. You begin to perform enlightenment. You say the right phrases: "Everything is energy," "I'm high vibe only." We're all one, but inside you're still fragmented. You judge others for being unconscious while secretly fearing your own shadow. You start to feel superior, not because you've read more books, done more ceremonies, or have more crystals. But real spirituality isn't about appearances. It's about authenticity. It's raw. It's real. And sometimes it's ugly. If your path is making you more obsessed with looking spiritual than being sincere, that's a red flag. Because the truth is, the most awakened people often look the most ordinary. Why? Because they're not trying to prove anything. They've already come home to themselves. The third sign is when you become addicted to seeking but allergic to integration. You constantly chase the next ceremony, the next retreat, the next guru, the next mystical experience. You live for the high of the breakthrough. But when it comes to applying those insights, grounding them into your daily life, doing the slow work of inner transformation, you resist, you avoid, you go chase another high. But spirituality isn't a festival. It's not a series of psychedelic moments. It's a practice. It's repetition. It's choosing presence again and again, even when it's boring. Especially when it's boring. If your path relies on constant stimulation to feel meaningful, then you're not growing, you're just consuming. And consumption, even of spiritual content, can become a distraction. The fourth sign is when you start seeing everyone else as the problem. You begin to believe that you've outgrown people. You claim your vibration is too high for certain friends, certain environments, certain conversations. And while it's true that growth often requires letting go, it becomes dangerous when we start blaming others for our discomfort. Spirituality isn't about division. It's about depth, and depth means staying present with people even when they trigger you, especially when they trigger you. Growth doesn't mean isolating yourself in a cocoon of like-minded people. It means learning to love across difference. It means staying open to the lessons that come from conflict. If your path is making you more judgmental, more isolated, more self-righteous, then it's not leading you higher, it's leading you into ego. The fifth sign is when you start outsourcing your power to systems, rituals, or external beings. You begin to believe that your healing depends on a full moon, a shaman, a tarot card, or a specific alignment. You wait for signs instead of listening to your soul. You become passive, waiting for the universe to do something instead of co-creating with it. But the point of any spiritual tool is to reconnect you with your inner authority, not to replace it. If your path is making you feel more dependent, more disempowered, more uncertain unless you check with a higher source, then you're not ascending. You're forgetting. Forgetting that the most sacred oracle is your own intuition. Forgetting that the most powerful alignment is your daily devotion. Forgetting that the real temple is built inside you, not around you. The sixth sign is one that almost no one talks about. It's when your spiritual path begins to make you more afraid. Afraid of bad vibes. Afraid of karma. Afraid of making a wrong decision. Afraid of being cursed, attacked, or energetically contaminated. You become hypervigilant. You carry sage like a weapon. You obsess over protection. And yes, energy hygiene is real, but living in fear is not the goal. Real spiritual power doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you peaceful. It doesn't make you afraid of darkness. It teaches you how to navigate it. If your journey is making you more fragile, more anxious, more fearful, it's time to pause. Because the highest truth is this: nothing can harm the part of you that's truly awake. Nothing can threaten the soul. And finally, the seventh sign is the most painful. You lose your joy. You become so focused on growth, on healing, on fixing yourself, that you forget how to live. Laughter feels shallow. Play feels pointless. Rest feels indulgent. You become a project, always working on yourself, never arriving. But the soul doesn't grow through pressure. It grows through presence, through wonder, through beauty. If your path has become exhausting, if it's made you forget the lightness of being, then something's off. Real spirituality doesn't weigh you down. It lifts you. Real awakening doesn't strip you of joy. It returns you to it.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
So I ask you now, where are you on this list? Which of these signs have quietly crept into your path without you noticing? Because the truth is, even the most devoted can drift. Even the most awakened can become lost. What matters isn't perfection. What matters is the willingness to pause, reflect, and reroute when necessary. The most powerful step you can take isn't forward. It's inward. Always inward. We often begin the spiritual path alone, wrestling with questions no one around us can answer, feeling things no one else seems to feel. So when we finally find a community of like-minded seekers, it feels like coming home. We feel seen, understood, accepted in a way we never were before. There's a kind of magic in that shared language, talk of energy, timelines, past lives, awakening. We drink it in. We finally belong. But slowly, imperceptibly, that same belonging can become a prison. The beautiful resonance that drew us in becomes an echo chamber that traps us in sameness, in comfort, in collective delusion. And we don't even see it happening, because it feels so right until it doesn't. Here's the truth most won't say out loud. Spiritual communities can become just as dogmatic, rigid, and ego-driven as any religion, corporation, or social structure. We like to believe we've transcended all that. But in reality, the human ego doesn't disappear when we awaken. It just puts on a robe and starts speaking in mantras. And when we enter a space where everyone speaks the same language and thinks the same way, we stop questioning. We stop challenging each other. We stop growing. We confuse agreement with truth. And in doing so, we silently surrender our discernment to the group mind. One of the most dangerous signs your spiritual path is going the wrong direction is when the community you're part of becomes an identity you're afraid to step outside of. You start filtering your intuition through what's acceptable in the group. You hesitate to express doubts or questions or even your own experiences if they don't match the collective narrative. You begin to silence parts of yourself in order to belong. And slowly, you become less sovereign, less curious, less you. But real spirituality doesn't ask you to conform. It asks you to expand, even if that means outgrowing the very circle that once helped you awaken. Have you ever noticed how quickly some spiritual spaces turn on those who question the leader, the teachings, or the vibe? How easily dissent is labeled as low frequency or unhealed trauma or resistance to truth? That's not awakening. That's spiritual authoritarianism dressed in white. Any space that cannot hold your questions without shaming you is not a spiritual space, it's a control system. And the most dangerous part is, it doesn't feel like control. It feels like connection. So you stay, you shrink, you nod along, and your soul starts to whisper something's not right, but you override it because the group says otherwise. The echo chamber is powerful because it mimics safety. It offers language, rituals, and validation that feels so good. But the moment that safety comes at the cost of your inner truth, it becomes a trap. You were not born to echo someone else's awakening. You were born to embody your own. And embodiment cannot thrive in environments that punish divergence. Ask yourself, when was the last time I disagreed with someone in my circle and still felt safe to belong? When was the last time I said something that went against the collective narrative and wasn't spiritually gaslit for it? Another subtle danger is when the community begins to revolve around a single teacher or figure whose word becomes law. At first, their presence may be genuinely illuminating, but over time they become the filter through which all truth is measured. Their perspective becomes the perspective. Their wounds become gospel, and the more people orbit around them, the more distorted the energy becomes. It's not about the teacher being evil. It's about the group unconsciously giving away their power. You begin to seek their validation rather than your own clarity. You start to model your journey after theirs instead of listening to your path. And eventually, you forget you even had a compass of your own. Real teachers don't create followers. They create mirrors. They remind you of your sovereignty. They don't need to be worshipped. They don't need to be right. They're not offended when you question them because they know that truth is not fragile. So if your teacher or your circle can't hold your evolving truth, then it's not spiritual growth. It's spiritual stagnation. Let's talk about the guilt. The quiet guilt that creeps in when you start to feel like you're over your community. You tell yourself you're being ungrateful, or disloyal, or impatient. You remember how much the group helped you, how much you learned, and so you stay. You smile. You pretend to still resonate. But inside, you're already gone. What you're feeling isn't betrayal. It's evolution, and true community doesn't bind you to the past. It blesses you into your next becoming, even if that becoming takes you somewhere else. The test of a healthy spiritual space is not how aligned everyone is. It's how well the space holds dissonance. Can it honor your transformation even when it challenges the norm? Can it celebrate your truth even when it contradicts the leader? Can it support your expansion even when it means you might leave? That's real love. That's real spirit. Anything else is attachment disguised as unity. So I ask you now, from the deepest place in your being, are you still growing, or are you just fitting in? Are you still evolving, or are you performing a version of yourself that the group approves of? Who are you when you're not mirroring the people around you? These are not questions meant to separate you from others. They're meant to return you to yourself, your raw, unfiltered, sacred self. Because the real path doesn't require a crowd. It only requires your truth. There's a moment we all face on the path when the very light we've worked so hard to embody begins to cast a shadow, and if we're not careful, we mistake that light for truth and that shadow for something we've already transcended. This is the false light trap. It's not darkness that deceives us here. It's brilliance. It's the illusion of elevation. It's the soft glow of spiritual pride dressed as growth. And it's one of the most dangerous places we can find ourselves because it doesn't feel like a pitfall, it feels like ascension. But what we call higher consciousness can sometimes be nothing more than a more sophisticated ego. We've just learned to decorate it with mantras, dress it in white linen, and convince ourselves that our healing makes us more evolved than others. That's not awakening. That's inflation. You see, the ego doesn't disappear as we grow, it adapts. It evolves with us. It learns the language of the soul and begins to mimic it. It starts saying all the right things. I'm just observing. I've let that go. That's not in alignment with my vibration. But underneath those polished words is often a subtle avoidance, a superiority complex wrapped in spiritual vocabulary. You're not detaching, you're disconnecting. You're not observing, you're judging. You're not elevated, you're armored. And because you've labeled it as growth, you don't question it. But ask yourself, is this really expansion, or have I just found a more comfortable mask to wear? Spiritual ego is the most convincing illusion you'll ever face because it looks, sounds, and even feels like awakening. You've done the work. You've faced the dark nights. You've healed the childhood wounds. And now you've built a version of yourself that radiates wisdom, peace, and poise. But here's the danger: you start identifying with that version so strongly that you lose touch with your raw, unpolished humanness. You start curating your presence. You become careful with your words, your image, your energy. Not because it's true to who you are, but because you're afraid of shattering the spiritual identity you've worked so hard to build. And in doing so, you become trapped in the very thing you once tried to liberate yourself from: performance. True growth invites transparency. It doesn't fear being seen in process. It doesn't need to look enlightened. It allows for contradiction, confusion, even chaos. If your path no longer allows room for your messiness, then it's not a path, it's a pedestal. And pedestals are lonely places. You start to feel like you can't be real with anyone. You can't say you're struggling. You can't admit you're doubting. You feel like you have to hold it all together because others look to you as a guide. But here's the truth. People don't need your perfection. They need your presence. They don't need your enlightenment. They need your honesty. The moment you stop being real is the moment you stop being of service. Another form of spiritual ego shows up in how we relate to others. We start believing that we see more clearly than those around us. We diagnose their wounds, their patterns, their karmic loops, but we stop listening. We stop learning. We stop being students. We start talking at people instead of with them. We become so focused on being the awakened one in the room that we forget everyone else is carrying sacred wisdom too. And here's the paradox. The more awakened you become, the more humble you must be. Because real awakening doesn't inflate the self, it dissolves it. If your growth is making you feel more above people instead of more with them, then you've mistaken light for hierarchy. And light doesn't separate, it illuminates. The false light trap is also seductive because it feels safe. It gives us a sense of control. We feel like we've figured it out. We've found the path, the tools, the rhythm. But growth is not static. It doesn't arrive at a final polished version of self. It keeps unraveling us. It keeps inviting us into deeper layers of surrender, of softness, of not knowing. The moment you think you've arrived is the moment you've stopped moving. And the moment you've stopped moving is the moment you've started dying spiritually, emotionally, energetically. So how do we stay free from this trap? We stay curious. We stay humble. We stay willing to be wrong. We stay open to feedback, even when it stings, especially when it stings. We surround ourselves with people who challenge us, not just cheer us on. We tell the truth even when it's messy. We ask ourselves hard questions. Am I using spiritual language to avoid emotional intimacy? Am I hiding behind insight instead of embodying wisdom? Am I more focused on appearing healed than actually being present with what's still raw inside me? The answer to the false light trap is not more light. It's more honesty. It's stripping away the polished image. It's allowing yourself to be seen in the in-between. It's remembering that the most spiritual thing you can do is be human, fully, imperfectly, authentically, because the soul doesn't need you to be impressive. It just needs you to be real. So I ask you now, with love and precision, where in your journey have you mistaken image for embodiment? Where have you started protecting your spiritual identity more than your inner truth? What version of yourself have you outgrown but are still performing because it's comfortable? These questions are not meant to shame you. They're meant to free you, because the path isn't about becoming someone. It's about unbecoming everything that isn't you. And sometimes the brightest thing you can do is step into your shadow. There comes a moment, quiet, sobering, almost sacred, when we realize that the path meant to liberate us has slowly become another cage. Not because someone forced us into it, but because we built it ourselves, brick by brick, belief by belief, practice by practice. We followed the signs, the teachers, the rituals, the mantras. We healed, we grew, we aligned. And yet, one day we wake up heavy. Not in the body, but in the soul. We feel distant from ourselves, cut off from something raw and alive. We've done everything right, but something feels wrong. And that's the paradox of the spiritual path. If you're not careful, the very journey that once set you free can become the performance that keeps you trapped. We start so sincerely. We want truth. We want peace. We want to remember who we are. But somewhere along the way, we begin to turn our healing into a brand, our presence into a persona, our lessons into content. We start curating our lives through a spiritual lens so polished that we can no longer feel the texture of our own soul. We become afraid to be seen in process. We only want to share when it's beautiful, when it's wise, when it's profound. But the truth is, the most sacred parts of the journey are rarely shareable. They're messy. They're private. They're awkward and confusing and deeply human. And when we lose touch with that, we lose touch with ourselves. The performance of awakening is seductive because it's rewarded. People admire it. They follow it. They mirror it back to you. And before long, you forget that you're performing at all. You start speaking in polished wisdom instead of raw truth. You start editing your emotions so they're easier to digest. You start living for the reflection instead of the reality. And here's the most painful part. You don't feel alive anymore. You feel like a symbol of who you used to be, a representation of a truth you no longer fully inhabit. That's when you know the path has become the prison. But what if that moment isn't failure? What if it's your soul asking for something deeper? What if it's not the end of your awakening, but the beginning of a more honest one? To break free, you must be willing to disappoint the image you've created. You must be willing to show up unfiltered, unscripted, unspiritual even. You must be willing to say, I don't know. To admit that you're tired, that you still get triggered, that some days it's hard to believe in anything. Not because you've lost your way, but because you're still on the way. The most awakened people I've ever met don't walk around glowing, they walk around grounded. They laugh at themselves. They cry when it hurts. They don't hide their humanity behind spiritual veneers. They let it be seen. And in doing so, they give everyone else permission to be real too. So I ask you now, with absolute love, what part of your spiritual identity are you afraid to let die? What would happen if you stopped trying to be the awakened one and let yourself be the real one? Could you trust that the divine doesn't need your performance, it only needs your presence? The truth is, awakening is not a straight line. It's not a mountain you climb, it's a spiral you're invited into again and again. And sometimes the most sacred thing you can do is take off the robes, put down the books, cancel the ceremony, and sit with yourself in silence. Not to fix anything, not to become anything, but just to be undone, uncertain, unfinished. Because it's in that space, in the raw, wild, uncurated center of your being that you meet the real you. Not the version you share online, not the version your community knows, the one you've always been underneath it all, the one who was never lost, the one who doesn't need to perform to be divine. And maybe, just maybe, that's the whole point. Not to become enlightened, but to remember that even in your confusion, your messiness, your contradictions, you are already whole. So if your path has become a prison, let this be your jailbreak. Smash the altar if you must. Burn the scripts. Take off the mask. And come home not to the version of yourself you've worked so hard to become, but to the one who's been waiting underneath all along. You. Just you. Free.